The night at Mr. B's had changed everything. By the time the sun rose over Harlem the next morning, everyone knew the name Frank Lucas. The story spread through barbershops and street corners, through social clubs and after-hours joints. A young man had walked into a bar, handled his business, and walked out without breaking a sweat. Big Teddy was gone. His crew had scattered. And Frank? Frank was just getting started. But here is the thing about making a name for yourself in the streets. Once you do it, you cannot stop. You have to keep moving, keep proving yourself, keep showing the world that the first time was not a fluke. And Frank Lucas understood this better than anyone. He knew that respect in Harlem was just the beginning. If he wanted real power, he would have to go beyond these familiar streets. He would have to venture into territory where nobody knew his name, where nobody cared about what happened at some bar uptown, where the rules were different and the stakes were higher. 3 weeks after the incident at Mr. B's, Frank made his move. What he was about to do was either the work of a genius or the act of a man with a death wish. Most people would have said it was suicide. Frank called it business. The Lower East Side of Manhattan was a different world from Harlem. The streets were narrower, the buildings older, and the men who ran things down there did not take kindly to outsiders, especially outsiders from uptown. This was their territory, had been for generations. Families had controlled these blocks since before Frank was born, names that carried weight throughout the entire eastern seaboard. Names that made even hardened criminals think twice before crossing certain lines. And Frank Lucas was about to walk right into the heart of it all. The drive downtown took about 20 minutes. Frank sat in the back of a dark sedan, watching the neighborhoods change outside the window. The brownstones of Harlem gave way to the tenements of the Lower East Side. The faces on the streets changed, too. By the time the car stopped on a narrow side street, Frank was deep in unfamiliar territory. The social club sat on the corner like it had been there forever. Because it had. A plain brick building with a simple wooden door. No sign, no markings, nothing to indicate what happened inside. But everyone in the neighborhood knew. Everyone knew that the men who gathered there made decisions that affected thousands of lives. Everyone knew that crossing them meant crossing a line you could never uncross. Frank stepped out of the car alone. His driver looked at him with something between concern and disbelief. "You sure about this?" the driver asked through the window. Frank did not answer. He simply straightened his tie, adjusted his jacket, and started walking toward that unmarked door. 2 men stood outside. Large men in expensive suits that did not quite fit their frames. They watched Frank approach with expressions that shifted from curiosity to confusion to something harder. "Who the hell is this?" one of them muttered to the other. Frank stopped in front of them. His posture was relaxed, his hands visible at his sides. Nothing about him suggested aggression, but nothing about him suggested fear either. "I am here to speak with the gentleman inside," Frank said calmly. "They are expecting me." The 2 men looked at each other, then back at Frank. "Nobody told us anything," the first one said, "and nobody from uptown has any business down here." Frank did not move, did not blink. He simply stood there, waiting, as if he had all the time in the world. "Tell them Frank Lucas is here. Tell them I have a proposition." Something about the way he said it made the men hesitate. There was a certainty in his voice that did not match the situation, a calm that seemed almost unnatural given where he was standing. One of them disappeared inside. The other kept his eyes locked on Frank. Neither spoke. The city sounds filled the silence. Horns in the distance, a dog barking somewhere, the hum of traffic on the main avenue. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened again. The first man emerged with a different expression on his face. "Come in," he said. But you should know, they think this is funny. Frank allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. They will not be laughing for long. The inside of the club was exactly what you would expect, and nothing like it at all. A long, narrow room with a bar on one side and tables scattered throughout. Old photographs on the walls, the smell of espresso, and something else. Something older. Generations of decisions made in rooms like this. At the back, seated around a large round table, were 5 men. They ranged in age from perhaps 40 to well over 70. Expensive suits, gold watches, the kind of confidence that comes from absolute power held for decades. And they were indeed laughing. Not cruelly, not with malice, but with the genuine amusement of men who could not believe what they were seeing. A young man from Harlem had walked into their club, alone, unarmed, either to ask for something or to tell them something. Either way, it was absurd, hilarious even. One of the older men wiped his eyes and gestured to an empty chair. "Please, sit. Tell us what brought you all the way downtown. We could use the entertainment." Frank did not sit. He stood at the edge of the table, making eye contact with each man in turn, taking their measure, letting them take his. The laughter began to fade. Something about his stillness was unsettling. When Frank finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. Every man at that table heard every word. "I did not come here to entertain you. I did not come here to ask for permission. I came here to tell you how things are going to be." The room went silent. The amusement was gone now, replaced by something else. The oldest man at the table leaned forward slightly. His eyes narrowed. "Go on," he said. His voice carried the weight of someone who had heard many things in rooms like this. Frank continued without hesitation. "You control the supply. I control the streets uptown. We both know the middlemen are taking too much and delivering too little. I am proposing we cut them out. You deal directly with me. I deal directly with my people. We both make more money, and nobody has to get hurt." One of the younger men at the table started to speak, but the old man raised his hand. Silence fell again. The old man studied Frank for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. "You walk in here, into our house, and you tell us how things are going to be?" He paused. "Either you are the bravest man I have ever met, or the stupidest." Frank met his gaze without flinching. "You will have to decide which one," he said. "But while you are deciding, think about this. I did not come here with an army. I did not come here with weapons. I came here alone, because I do not need either of those things. What I have is something more valuable. I have ambition. I have patience. And I have nothing to lose." The words hung in the air. Frank could feel the tension shifting. The other men at the table were looking at their leader now, waiting for a response, waiting for direction. The old man leaned back in his chair. He reached for a glass of wine that had been sitting untouched in front of him, took a slow sip, set it down. "You know what I think?" he said finally. "I think you remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." He paused. "Someone who walked into a room full of men who underestimated him and walked out owning everything they had." Frank said nothing. He simply waited. The old man nodded slowly. "Sit down, Mr. Lucas. Let us talk business." What happened next in that social club changed the course of Frank Lucas's entire career. The specifics of the deal they made that night remained secret for years. But the results? The results were visible to anyone paying attention. Within months, Frank had access to supply lines that no one from Harlem had ever touched before. He had connections that reached far beyond the streets he grew up on. He had the foundation for an empire. When Frank walked out of that club several hours later, The sun was starting to rise over the Lower East Side. The same two men who had stopped him at the door were now holding it open for him. Neither one was laughing anymore. Frank Lucas had done what everyone said was impossible. He had walked into enemy territory. He had faced men who controlled more power than he could imagine, and he had walked out with exactly what he came for. But there is something Frank did not know that night, something that would become clear only later. He was not the only one who had noticed his rise. Eyes were watching from places he never expected. Some of those eyes belonged to friends, and some belonged to enemies he had not yet made. The deal with the men downtown had put him on a different level, but it had also painted a target on his back. A target that would only grow larger as his power increased. Next time, on Frank Lucas Chronicles. They came for Frank in the middle of the night. $3 million. Gone in an instant. And the war that followed would make everything before it look like child's play. That story is coming in Part 3.